Hello, it's great to see you here again. Today we're going to dive into a quote from Jesus that offers many lessons for our lives. Stay with me until the end and leave inspired to have a stronger spiritual life. Let's go. That day no one noticed what was about to happen. The sun was setting behind the hills, the house was growing quiet, and the servants were finishing their tasks, each going their own way. But one man remained standing. He wasn't known for strength or position, but for something rare, a heart that stayed awake. While everyone else relaxed, he kept caring for his master's house, preparing food for the others, not knowing when the master would return. Jesus told this parable to speak to you and me. He described two servants, one faithful who stayed vigilant and another who, weary of waiting, got lost in distraction. The faithful servant wasn't perfect, but he had purpose to serve. He knew that everything he had, food, resources, and time, was temporary, entrusted to him by a Lord who trusted him first. And that was what made him trustworthy. The unfaithful servant, however, looked at the same scene and thought in his heart that the master was taking too long. That's where everything began to fade. He didn't lose faith overnight. He simply got distracted. Responsibilities became heavy, comfort seemed more urgent, and the mission to care for others was pushed aside. The heart that once served began to live for itself. Isn't that the same today? We live surrounded by goals, noise, and promises of happiness that empty the soul. We are blessed with possessions, technology, and opportunity, yet we often lose sight of their purpose. The faithful servant isn't the one who owns little, but the one who understands that everything he has exists to serve. He remains steady when the whole world seems distracted. The question Jesus asked still echoes today. What will the Lord find in you when he returns? A weary heart that gave up on the mission, or a servant who keeps feeding others with faith and love, even when no one is watching? Today you will discover powerful lessons from this parable, revelations that can transform the way you see waiting, faithfulness, and the purpose of life. The sun rose over the wide fields of the estate, painting the sky with shades of gold and hope. The servants gathered in the courtyard, attentive to the master's voice as he prepared for a long journey. Among them stood an ordinary man, but with steady eyes and a sincere heart. He listened carefully to every word, feeling both the weight and honor of a sacred responsibility. That day the master entrusted him with the house, the resources, and the care of all the other servants, not just to manage, but to feed, guide, and protect. It was a call to faithfulness. When the moment of departure came, the master walked slowly down the road until he disappeared in the distance. For a moment, silence filled the place. The faithful servant took a deep breath, looked around, and understood that from that day forward, the house was more than a building. It was a spiritual field. Everything the master had left behind represented a piece of his trust. Every loaf of bread, every jar, every person was part of a mission that demanded vigilance and love. As the faithful servant organized the work, another servant watched him with indifference. Responsibility didn't touch his heart the same way. To him, the master's delay meant freedom, not duty. But the faithful one refused to be distracted. He started early and ended late, caring for the house as if the master were still there. When food ran short, he shared what little he had. When others lost courage, he encouraged them. And every night before resting, he knelt in silence and asked for strength to remain worthy of the trust placed in him. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The wind that swept through the house carried the faint sound of passing time. Some began to doubt whether the master would ever return. But the faithful servant kept his heart steady. He didn't serve out of fear, but out of love. He understood that every gesture, no matter how small, was a form of worship. For him, time was not a season of forgetfulness. It was a field of testing. One evening as the sun set, the faithful servant saw the lamps glowing softly inside the jars. The day's work was done. While others rested, he paused to pray. He didn't ask for wealth or rest, but for perseverance. Fatigue often visited him. Loneliness surrounded him, but the voice of duty was stronger. And without realizing it, the servant was becoming more like the master he served. What he didn't know was that the delay that tested him so deeply was not neglect. It was part of the plan. Every day he chose to remain faithful was being noticed. Every act of love and care was being recorded. And when the moment came, that servant would be found exactly where the master had left him, serving with an awakened heart while the world slept. Time passed like a wind that changes direction without warning. Mornings came and went. Months turned into seasons. And though the house looked the same, the hearts inside were no longer alike. The faithful servant kept the same rhythm, the same care, and the same hope. Every dawn he repeated the prayer that had sustained him from the beginning, that the Master would find him standing, serving with joy when he returned. The long days brought new trials. There was weariness, scarcity, and small disputes among the servants. Many murmured that the Master would never come back. But the faithful one answered with calm. He believed the delay was not abandonment, it was purpose. So he kept feeding the others with what he had, both the bread of the body and the bread of faith. The scenes of the house showed an ordinary man doing what many despised, gathering grain, sharing food, fixing tools, caring for the weak. There was purpose in everything, even in simple tasks. His faithfulness became a quiet beacon for those still trying to stay firm. Meanwhile, the other servant, the unfaithful one, looked at the same horizon and saw only monotony. The work wearied him, the discipline irritated him. He began to seek distractions, wasting his time in useless talk and fleeting pleasures. The master's absence became his excuse for neglect. The heart that once feared and respected now settled into indifference. The faithful servant saw it all but did not judge. He prayed silently for the one slowly losing his way. He understood that caring for the house also meant caring for souls. His vision went beyond the walls and fields. He knew that true service was spiritual, that every act of love could awaken faith in those who watched him. The nights grew colder. The moon seemed farther away. The faithful servant kept lighting the lamps and maintaining the fire, even when no one else saw meaning in it. That flame was a symbol of something greater. It represented the inner light that the Master had lit within him, a light he had sworn never to let die. But there were days when discouragement visited him, days when loneliness felt heavier than the work. In those moments he remembered the Master's voice, his words and promises, and with a tired heart, he whispered to himself that the owner of this house would return, and that was enough to continue. As time went on, the seeds he had planted began to grow. The fields flourished again, and the servants who had lost heart returned to their work. The example of one man awakened the faith of others. It was as if his care kept the memory of the Master alive in every corner of the house. Today, how many live the same way? Time feels long. Distractions are many, and faith fades amid the rush and routine. The parable of Jesus is not just a made-up story. It's a portrait of the present. There are still faithful servants who keep serving when no one is watching, who resist the temptation to give up, who choose to care for others instead of living for themselves. And now, I want to invite you to be part of this too. Write in the comments which country and city you're watching from. I want to see how far this message is reaching, and watch the map of faithfulness spread across the world. Each point of light, each testimony, is an answer to the same question that has echoed since the days of Jesus. Will there still be faithful servants when the Son of Man returns? The faithful servant of that house never imagined that his quiet example would cross the boundaries of time. While the world was distracted, he remained steady, caring for others and keeping hope alive. But what he didn't know was that the most decisive moment in history was about to arrive. The master's delay was about to reveal the hearts of all the servants, and what was coming would change everything. Time dragged on as if the clock of the earth had stopped. Hope was a thin thread holding the hearts of those who still believed. The faithful servant continued his work, even when exhaustion seemed heavier than strength. There were days when his mind questioned the reason for such delay, but his spirit reminded him that obedience does not depend on visible rewards. What he did out of love, not for recognition. The rains delayed, supplies ran low, and the house was quieter than ever. Still, he rose early and followed his routine. With every task completed, his expression revealed peace, not because everything was well, but because he knew in whom he trusted. It was as if the master's absence had become the greatest test of faith in his life. While the faithful servant remained constant, the unfaithful one no longer hid his negligence. He laughed at duty, mocked the others' patience, and said that the master had forgotten them. His hardened heart did not understand that the real test was not enduring time, but staying faithful within it. Hard days began to separate appearance from essence. The faithful servant, though exhausted, kept feeding others. He shared the little he had, cleaned the house, helped the sick, and kept the altar burning. Each gesture, each prayer, each drop of effort became a silent offering to the owner of the house. He didn't know it, but heaven itself was watching. The scene was simple but filled with eternity. A man alone in ordinary tasks, sustaining faith in a time of collective neglect. The faithful one worked while the unfaithful one drifted in distraction. The contrast grew sharper. One served out of conviction, the other out of convenience. The heart of the faithful servant was tested in the fire of delay. There were moments when loneliness felt unbearable, and the thought of giving up pressed close. But then he remembered the master's words. And when everything seemed dark, he reminded himself that faith is not a feeling, it is a choice. The choice to keep doing good when no one else does. On one of the quietest nights, the faithful servant looked up and noticed that even the stars seemed distant. But something within whispered that the master was nearer than he imagined. The silence was not absence. It was observation. The one who seemed to delay was simply waiting for the right moment to return. How often is our faith tested the same way? We pray, we serve, we help, and heaven seems silent. The heart asks where the Lord is, and the mind tries to fill the void with noise. But true faithfulness is revealed in such moments. It is born in darkness, grows in waiting, and matures in silence. This parable is not only about a servant and a house, it is about us, a world that lost the rhythm of eternity and surrendered to haste. The faithful servant represents the believer, who keeps serving even when applause fades, when faith is challenged, when voices around say it's not worth it, and that's when the story comes alive. The time of testing was coming to an end. The master had not forgotten, and the moment of return had already been set. As the faithful servant knelt once more in prayer, a distant sound began to echo. It was soft but unmistakable. Something was changing in the air. What was about to happen would show the whole world that every act of faithfulness is worth it, even when no one sees. The dawn was cold and silent. The lamps flickered, as if they knew something was about to happen. The faithful servant had worked all day, and now rested for a moment, sitting by the door. His hands, marked by labor, told the story of a lifetime of service. Weariness surrounded him, yet his heart remained awake. On the horizon, a light began to pierce the darkness. It was unlike any other, radiant with authority as if carrying a presence. The faithful servant stood, his body trembling, his heart racing. The road that once seemed empty now echoed with footsteps. Slowly the figure of the master appeared. He came in silence, yet every step carried the weight of eternity. The house slept. Many had stopped watching. Others had drowned in the distractions of the night. But that servant, though tired, had remained steadfast. When the master entered through the door, he found everything in order. The food prepared and the fire still burning. The eyes of the master met the eyes of the servant, and in that moment no words were needed. Faithfulness spoke for itself. Meanwhile, the other servant woke too late. The sound of the master's steps echoed through the halls, and the weight of his neglect fell upon him like thunder. The feast he had made for himself ended in silence. The one who had lived for his own pleasure now hid in fear from the gaze he once despised. The faithful servant, on the other hand, knelt before his master and wept, not out of fear, but out of joy. He had been found serving. The long wait, the cold nights, the lonely work, all of it now made sense. The master placed his hand on his shoulder and lifted him up. The reward was not in riches, but in hearing the words that echoed like music in his heart. "Well done, good and faithful servant." Light filled the house. Every dark corner now shone with the presence of the one who had returned. The faithful servant did not seek glory, only the joy of being before his master. And as the master gave new responsibilities, the servant realized that the time of waiting had not been wasted. Every trial, every act of surrender had shaped his heart for this moment. Today, the same call still echoes. The Lord continues to entrust his house, his resources, and his work to those who are willing to serve. He still watches, still waits, and still will return. The question is whether he will find us awake or distracted. If this story is speaking to your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone. It helps us spread light, hope, and faith in a time when many are spiritually asleep. Every like, every share is like lighting one more lamp in the house of the world. The faithful servant of Matthew 24 represents what God expects from each of us. Not perfection, but perseverance. Not brilliance, but constancy. Faithfulness in the small things prepares the heart for the great encounter. And as the faithful servant rejoiced in his master's return, it seemed that heaven itself smiled. The waiting was finally over. But the story was far from finished. It was about to reveal one last and profound secret. What came next would show the true meaning of serving the Lord with all the heart. The house was now full of life. The master walked through every room, observing carefully what had been cared for and what had been neglected. His presence filled the place with reverence. It was as if even the walls breathed relief at seeing their owner return. The faithful servant followed him with a peaceful heart, not out of pride but gratitude. Everything he had done out of love. The master looked at the table set, the food prepared, the clean jars, and the lamps still burning. In every detail he saw the reflection of silent faithfulness, the service of one who worked unseen. No gesture had been forgotten. No act of kindness had gone unnoticed. The servant who had once been merely a caretaker now became heir of the whole house. The master's eyes were full of tenderness. He knew how much that servant had fought against weariness, discouragement, and the temptation to give up. He knew the nights he had wept alone, the days he had served without strength and still chose to remain faithful. The reward was not a position, but the joy of being with his master again. The restored house symbolized the renewed communion between the Creator and those who wait for him. Outside, the other servant watched from afar. Everything he had lived for now seemed small in the light of the master's glory. He understood too late that true joy is not in possessing but in belonging. And when the master looked at him, there was no hatred in his eyes, only sadness for a heart that had chosen to drift away. The house pulsed again with harmony. The master called everyone together, and a feast was prepared. The faithful servant was placed at the head of the table, not to be served, but to keep serving now with a light and joyful heart. What he once did by faith, he now did through perfect love. Service had become eternal joy. As the banquet continued, the faithful servant looked toward the sky and saw that the night had disappeared. A new dawn was shining, and the time of waiting had ended forever. He understood that the delay had never been punishment. It was the tool the master used to reveal who truly loved him. The test of waiting had become the seal of eternity. This parable is not about wealth or power, but about purpose. The Lord still seeks servants like this, faithful in small things, steady in routine, sensitive to his call. He still places his trust in simple people who care for others, who share their bread, who keep the flame of hope burning. Every act of love is a spark of God's kingdom within an ordinary home. Every word of faith, every deed of kindness is food placed on the spiritual table of the world. And when Christ returns, he will not look for titles or positions, but for awakened hearts, watchful eyes and willing hands. The story of that servant is a living reminder that time is short, but eternity is sure. Everything done in love for the Lord will remain. The day of his return will be the reunion with everything that truly mattered. And when the Lord looks upon your life, may he also find your lamps burning, your table prepared, and your heart faithful. For on that day, the words that will echo over his servants will be the same ones spoken in that distant house. Well done, good and faithful servant, enter into the joy of your Lord. But there is still something more. The story that began with a departure and ended with a reunion holds a truth that touches every one of us. The time of waiting is not yet over. The Lord still comes to meet every heart that remains awake. And the greatest miracle happens when he not only enters the house. The parable of the faithful and unfaithful servants is a mirror held before the human heart. It shows us that waiting was never the problem. It's what we choose to do while we wait that reveals who we are. The faithful servant learned to turn time into worship. He didn't wait with folded arms, but through service, care, and love. The unfaithful servant, however, used that same time to live for himself, forgetting the mission the Lord had entrusted to him. Faithfulness is not measured by how much we do, but by the constancy of the heart. It is doing good when no one sees, staying true when the world gets distracted. The faithful servant represents those who, even when weary, keep praying, forgiving, helping, and sowing hope. He understood that the true treasure is not in possessions accumulated, but in lives reached by love. This parable is not merely a moral story, it is a divine calling. It speaks of the balance we must find between caring for the earth and preparing the heart for heaven. There is no sin in having possessions. The danger lies in living for them. The Lord continues to entrust talents, time, and opportunities, expecting them to be used to spread goodness and salvation. Every act of love is a silent testimony that there are still faithful servants in this world. The faithful servant was rewarded because he stayed awake while others slept. He represents those who choose to be light amid distraction, and that same choice stands before us now. The question remains, what will the Lord find in you when he returns? A comfortable heart or a servant awake and ready to serve? If this story spoke to your heart, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this message with someone who needs to be awakened. Together, we can rekindle the flame of faithfulness and spread the hope our world so desperately needs. May the Lord find in us faithful servants who feed others with faith, perseverance, and love. For the time of waiting is almost over, and the King is coming. May he find us awake, serving, and with our lamps burning. This is the Little Light, a community of faith bringing hope through Bible stories that inspire life.